Okay, here we are. Oldsmobile Intrigue 2001. And what we have was a stalling issue, check engine light on. Here's our codes. Ignore the mass airflow sensor code. I have it unplugged so I can get to the PCM. That P0335 is the one that we want to pay attention to. It's crankshaft position sensor A circuit failed. If you never worked on one of these, P35, the miniature version of the North Star. This is how the crankshaft sensor is set up. So you have our PCM up here, crankshaft sensor down here. There's going to be 6 wires going to it, and what we have is we have two 12-volt references from the PCM going to the crankshaft sensor. This actually has 2 sensors in it, and you can see there's 2 signal wires, and then there's 2 low references, 2 grounds. So we have 2 sensors built into one, and just like we have in this particular situation, you can have one sensor that fails. You'll still have a signal on one but not the other. I'm just going to walk you through some of the steps that you want to do to confirm that the sensor is the failed component. So again, you see that crankshaft sensor A circuit. And we don't know which one's A right at the moment, but it's one of them. So what I've done is I've taken the scope and I've hooked up to both signal wires right at the PCM. I want to see what the PCM is seeing. So I'll show you the setup. There's our PCM, we're tied in, and we got the pico. And once my screen comes up, all right. So on channel B, you can see a nice clean signal, and channel A, some noise from the ignition, but that is about it. There's nothing else going on. That's our problem circuit. Okay. So does that alone mean that we need a crankshaft sensor? Well, most likely, and they're a common failure on these. But the next thing that we need to do is we need to actually go to the sensor itself, make sure the connector's not damaged, check pin fit, but we need to check powers, grounds, and the signal wires themselves to make sure that there's no issue in this wiring from here to here, because there could be an open, there could be a short to ground somewhere, short to each other, where the harnesses or the wires run next to each other. Any of that's possible. So I'm going to check for these 12-volt references. I'm going to check for these grounds. I'm going to check for the signal wires at the sensor itself, so they make sure, because we know we're getting our signal back to here at least, but what if this other signal wire is open and it's not the fault of the crankshaft sensor? And actually, a little backstory, this crankshaft sensor had been replaced less than a year ago. It was an aftermarket one, so I wouldn't be surprised if it's failed, but we're going to go underneath and check it, and that'll be the second part of my video here. One more thing, and I'll mention it in the next part of the video, is that this is a pull-up sensor. So let me show you what that means here. It means that we start at 0, or a ground reference that the PCM provides, and this sensor actually pulls it up to the 5 volts when the tooth passes by the sensor. So you can see right now we're at 0 here as well. The sensor, it would appear, is not pulling it up, but that could be an open wire, that could be short to ground. That's why we have to go to our sensor and check these circuits before we replace it. So we'll go underneath, and we're going to bring you underneath here, and we're going to do just a couple checks at the connector for the crankshaft sensor, which is right here. And hopefully you can see the meter there, but what we're doing right now is we're checking for power on 2 of these wires, the 12-volt reference. So you can see on that one we have power, and on that one we have power, system voltage. We're a little low on the voltage. We got the key on. It's GM, of course it's draining, so let's do this quick. The next check I'm going to switch my reference to a positive on my meter. So now we'll show a negative, but we're going to show when ground is present, and that should be the other 4 wires. So there's one, there's one, I can get in there, there's one, and there's one. So what that is the two low reference feeds to the sensor and the two signal wires. This is a pull-up sensor, so there's actually a ground on the signal wires, and the sensor is going to pull it up to 5 volts. And that low reference is provided by the PCM. Now the only other question we have here is one of those signal wires shorted to ground? Because we want that ground reference from the PCM. We don't want an actual ground like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to test these 4 grounds. 2 of them should light like that, and like that. The signal wire should not. It does not, and does not. So we're all good on the wiring. The last thing to check is pin fitment, and of course there is the dead giveaway of oil in the connector. I don't know if you can see that on the video, but that is probably the biggest giveaway that the sensor has definitely failed. So it's up above that starter. Just pull the starter, it makes it a lot easier. Nice and hot up there, of course, but that's where the crankshaft sensor lives, and that's what we have to replace.